I am Arida Petersen, 29 years old, and I discovered I'd been deleted from existence on a rainy Tuesday in Copenhagen while drinking coffee in my Vesterbro apartment. To outsiders, the Petersen family represented Danish perfection, a dynasty of architects and designers whose minimalist aesthetic shaped Copenhagen's skyline. My adoptive father, Magnus Petersen, designed the Royal Library extension. My adoptive mother, Astrid, curated exhibitions at the Danish Design Museum. But behind those hygge photo shoots and magazine profiles celebrating our beautiful blended family, I was being systematically erased. I just didn't know how literally until that morning when I logged into our family's ancestry account to research my birth heritage and found myself gone, not moved or footnoted, but completely absent, as if I'd never existed at all. I refreshed the page 3 times, certain it was a glitch. The Petersen family tree sprawled across my screen with its impressive branches. Architects dating back to the 1800s, resistance fighters during the occupation, even a connection to Hans Christian Andersen. My siblings were there, Frederick with his Copenhagen Business School degree, Sophie with her gallery in Christianshavn, Lars with his sustainable architecture firm. But where my name should have been, connected to Magnus and Astrid with the small notation adopted 1995, there was nothing. Just empty space, as if someone had taken digital scissors and cut me out of our shared history. My hands shook as I called Sophie, my sister, who'd always been closest to me despite everything. The ancestry account, I said without preamble. Why am I not there? The silence stretched across Copenhagen's morning traffic sounds. Arida, she finally said, her voice careful as hand-blown glass. We need to talk. Can you come to the gallery? But I already knew. The careful tone, the deflection, the suggestion of a face-to-face meeting for news that could be delivered over the phone. This wasn't an accident or oversight. This was deliberate erasure, and my sister, my supposed ally, had known. The gallery in Christianshavn was exactly what you'd expect from a Petersen. White walls, blonde wood, pieces that cost more than most people's cars displayed, with reverential spacing. Sophie waited in her office, her platinum hair severe against her black turtleneck, looking like our mother's younger clone. Frederick and Lars were there too, a family tribunal minus the parents who were conveniently in Aarhus for a design conference. We've been discussing the family legacy, Frederick began, using his business school voice. With Far's retirement approaching and the family firm's succession planning. You erased me, I interrupted. From our ancestry account. From our family history. Why? Lars, always the most direct, leaned forward. Because you're not really a Petersen, Arida. You never were. We love you, but love doesn't change biology. The family legacy, the firm, the reputation, it needs to pass through actual blood. The words hit like winter wind off the Øresund. 24 years of being their sister, and it came down to blood I didn't share. Far and Moore agreed to this? I asked, though the answer was obvious in their coordinated presence. They think it's best, Sophie said softly. For the firm's future. For clarity. Danish heritage is important to our clients, our reputation. Having someone who's... She gestured vaguely at me, at my darker complexion that had always stood out in family photos like a coffee stain on white linen. Someone who's what? I pressed. Not blonde? Not biologically related? Not Danish enough despite being raised here, speaking the language perfectly, contributing to the family's success? Someone who doesn't represent our aesthetic, Frederick said with corporate coldness. The Petersen brand is about continuity, tradition, a certain look. You're brilliant, Arida, but you don't fit the image. I laughed then, sharp and bitter as burnt coffee. The image. After everything, every family dinner where I helped Moore with her presentations, every project where I contributed designs that won awards under the Petersen name, every time I defended this family's reputation, I'm reduced to not fitting the image. I left the gallery walking through Christianshavn's canals, my reflection fragmenting in the water below. 24 years of belonging erased because my DNA didn't match their marketing materials. But as I walked, anger crystallized into something harder and more useful. They wanted to erase me from their history? Fine. I'd write my own. And I'd start by uncovering the truth they'd hidden. Why Magnus and Astrid Petersen had adopted a brown baby in 1995 when they already had 3 biological children who looked like Viking propaganda posters. The investigation started at the adoption agency, closed now but with records archived at the state archives. My birth name had been Arida, my biological mother an Iranian refugee who died in childbirth. No father listed. The case file was thin, but one document made me pause, a letter from Astrid to the adoption coordinator, pleading to be considered despite already having 3 children. "We have so much love to give," she'd written. "And this child deserves a family who will cherish her uniqueness, celebrate her heritage, give her every opportunity." The words were beautiful. So why had that cherishing family just deleted me from their digital DNA? I dug deeper, spending weeks in archives, libraries, government offices. Danish efficiency meant everything was documented, filed, retrievable if you knew where to look. And what I found reshaped everything I thought I knew about the Petersens. Financial records showed the family architecture firm had been failing in 1995, hemorrhaging money from Magnus' ambitious projects. Then suddenly, an influx of capital from an anonymous investor that coincided exactly with my adoption. Letters between lawyers referenced a trust fund, conditions, a baby who needed parents with the right profile. My adoption hadn't been about love or charity. It had been a business transaction. The full truth emerged from Magnus' own files, carelessly archived in the firm's historic records. The anonymous investor had been my biological father, Rashid Nazari, an Iranian tech billionaire who'd had an affair with my mother. He couldn't claim me publicly but wanted me raised with advantages, education, opportunities. The Petersens had been perfect, desperate enough to accept his terms, respectable enough to provide the right environment, white enough that his brown daughter might gain acceptance through proximity. The trust fund had saved their firm, paid for renovations, launched them into architectural stardom. And all they'd had to do was raise me as their own. Until now, when their biological children decided I'd served my purpose. I sat in my apartment surrounded by evidence of my purchased childhood, understanding finally why I'd always felt like a well-treated guest rather than a daughter. Every family vacation, every proud introduction at industry events, every inclusion had been contractually obligated. They'd been paid to love me, and now that the payments had presumably ended, I was 29, likely the trust's termination age. They were free to delete me like an expired contract. But they'd made one crucial mistake. The digital ancestry account was just the beginning. If they could erase me from their history, I could reveal their history to everyone. The memoir began as revenge and evolved into reclamation. I wrote at night after my day job at a competing architecture firm, fueled by Ethiopian coffee and the rage of discarded daughters. Every chapter peeled back the Petersens' pristine facade. The financial desperation they'd hidden. The transactional adoption they'd dressed as humanitarian virtue. The way they'd used my presence to appear progressive while keeping me at arm's length emotionally. How they'd taken credit for my design contributions, claiming my perspectives as their own multicultural insights. The title came to me at dawn after an all-night writing session. Chosen. The True Price of a Perfect Danish Family. But the book became more than exposure. It transformed into an exploration of identity, belonging, the complexity of transracial adoption. I interviewed other adoptees, researchers, psychologists, connected with the Iranian Danish community I'd been kept from. Learned about my biological mother, a poet who'd fled persecution, whose words I'd inherited without knowing. Discovered my biological father still lived, had been watching from afar, prevented by legal agreements from contact. The Petersens had stolen more than just my place in their tree. They'd stolen my connection to roots I had a right to explore. When the book was complete, I faced a choice. Publish it and destroy the family who'd raised me, however transactionally, or use it as leverage for something more valuable than revenge. I chose a middle path, sending the manuscript to Magnus and Astrid with a simple note. Your children deleted me from our family history. This is the history they don't know. We should talk. The meeting happened at their Frederiksberg home, the one I'd grown up in but never quite belonged to. Magnus had aged, his architect's precision crumbling into uncertainty. Astrid clutched her coffee cup like a shield. Their biological children were absent, probably strategizing damage control. It's all true, isn't it? I asked, placing the adoption documents on their designer table. The money, the trust fund, the conditions. You were paid to raise me. Astrid began crying. Elegant tears that didn't disturb her makeup. We grew to love you, Arida. Whatever the beginning, you became our daughter. But never enough to defend me when you're real. Children decided I was inconvenient. Never enough to stop them from erasing me like I was a mistake in the margins. Magnus found his voice. We didn't know about the ancestry account. When we found out, you did nothing. Just like you did nothing when Frederick started pushing me out of family business discussions. When Sophie stopped inviting me to gallery events. When Lars redesigned the firm's website and mysteriously forgot to include my contributed projects. I pulled out my laptop, showing them the manuscript. Their faces paled as they read excerpts. The financial records, the trust details, the truth about their architectural success built on my existence. This publishes next month unless we reach an understanding, I said. And before you threaten legal action, everything is documented. Every payment, every letter, every lie you told about choosing me out of love when you chose me for survival. What do you want? Magnus asked, his voice defeated. First, restoration to all family records and histories. Not as a footnote, but as a full member. Second, public acknowledgement of my contributions to the firm's designs. Third, the contact information for my biological father, the man whose money built your empire. And finally, a written apology from Frederick, Sophie, and Lars for their attempted erasure. The negotiations were swift. The Petersens couldn't afford the scandal, not with their reputation built on progressive values and inclusive design. My siblings were forced to confront the truth about their family's foundation. That their privileged lives had been funded by the brown sister they'd tried to delete. The ancestry account was corrected within days. The firm's website updated with my full biography and project credits. But most importantly, I received a phone number for Rashid Nazari, the father I'd never known existed. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, spanning languages and continents, filling in gaps the Petersens had created. He'd honored their agreement, but never stopped hoping I'd find him. He'd built his fortune thinking of the daughter he couldn't claim, creating a scholarship fund for Iranian refugees in Denmark, naming it after my biological mother. The memoir published anyway, but revised. No longer an exposé, but an exploration of what family means when it's both chosen and bought, created and complicated. It became a bestseller not for scandal but for honesty, resonating with adoptees worldwide who'd felt the gap between gratitude and belonging. The Petersens attended my book launch, sitting in the front row like the supportive family they'd learned to actually be rather than perform. My siblings apologized publicly, their discomfort palpable but necessary. The book tour took me across Europe, America, eventually to Tehran where I stood at my biological mother's grave. Reading her poetry in Farsi, I was finally learning. I met cousins, aunts, an entire constellation of family the Petersens had paid to keep away. But I also returned to Copenhagen, to the apartment in Vesterbro where I discovered my deletion. Because this was still home, these complicated people still family, even if the shape of that family had been redrawn. I used the book proceeds to establish the Arida Petersen Foundation, supporting transracial adoptees in Denmark and promoting honest conversations about identity, belonging, and the prices we pay for family. The Petersens contributed, not from guilt but from genuine evolution. My siblings began their own journey of understanding how privilege can blind, how biology doesn't determine worth, how erasing someone from records doesn't erase them from reality. Chosen became required reading in Danish sociology programs, its impact extending beyond my story to challenge narratives about family, race, and belonging in Scandinavian society. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. By trying to erase me from their family tree, they'd made me the most famous Petersen of all. My face on book covers, my story in international media, my voice shaping conversations about adoption and identity. The girl who didn't fit their aesthetic became the one defining it, expanding it, forcing Denmark to confront its own assumptions about who belongs and why. The architecture of family, I learned, isn't about blood or buildings. It's about the stories we tell and the ones we try to hide. It's about choosing to include rather than erase, to expand rather than contract, to build bridges rather than walls. I am Arida Petersen. Legally, legitimately, undeletably. They erased me from the family tree, so I planted a forest. They said I wasn't a real daughter, so I became the realest truth they'd ever faced. They wanted to preserve their legacy through biological purity, but legacies aren't preserved, they're written. And I rewrote ours with the ink of everything they'd tried to hide, creating a story more powerful than any ancestry account could contain. Because in the end, the most profound revenge isn't destruction. It's reconstruction. taking the materials of your erasure and building something so significant, so undeniable, that they have to acknowledge you were always the cornerstone they tried to remove. The Petersen family tree grows differently now. It includes adoptees, immigrants, chosen family, complicated truths. It acknowledges that its branches were fertilized by Iranian tech money and refugee poetry, that its acclaimed designs include perspectives from the daughter they tried to delete. It's messier, more honest, more beautiful. And at its heart is a simple truth they've finally learned. You can't erase someone who refuses to be erased. You can only watch as they write themselves back into history, bigger and bolder than you ever imagined possible. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they'll teach you that a family tree with broken branches can still bear fruit, sweeter for the struggle, stronger for the storm, and absolutely impossible to uproot once it decides to grow wild.